Okay, good afternoon, class, and welcome to Environmental Science 12. We're starting this week by just approaching environmental science on its own. We look at lesson 4 right now, and what we're trying to look at today is difference between weather and climate, and what influences climate, things like latitude and air circulation. So we look at some examples of that, and hopefully that after we look at some examples, you'll be able to answer the questions, and they'll be listed in your pickup box under assignment 4, climate. And I'm going to do 2 lessons on that. Today's part A and tomorrow part B. And on the home support students, it'll be on the website again under Environmental Science 12 and assignment 4. Okay, so we looked at all different forms of energy the other day, and some of you may or may not, or the other day last week. Anybody off the top of their head can think of one, a form of energy? Water and wind. Any others? What about the one that comes from today, so warm today? Call that solar energy, comes from the sun. We also have sound energy, nuclear energy, things that help us do work, called mechanical energy. And probably later in science you learned about things like levers and pulleys and things that can make work a lot easier, right? Coal. Coal is a source of energy. Yeah, it's a source of energy which produces thermal energy. Okay, it's a fossil fuel. You're right. It's a good example. Another form of energy would be electrical. Things that mostly everything in the universe has some form of electrical. In fact, this is why we can move. It's energy from our brain sending the signals. Electrical impulses are making our muscles and bones move. So there's some quick examples of the forms of energy. Now, weather versus climate. Some people think that it's the same thing. There is a bit of a difference. Weather is usually what happens today. What's the weather like? Usually we say it's raining or it's hot, it's cold, it's snowing. That's the weather. But the climate is the average of the weather over a period of time in any one particular area. The climate's going to change for what happens here in the Maritimes and what compares to, say, what happens in central Canada or down in southern U.S. where they're suffering those floods now from the hurricane, or maybe even down in the tropics. The climates are different. And same thing up at the poles, right? Up in the Arctic regions, it's very cold there. Probably all year long if you go further north and further south. So weather is what happens in the atmosphere at a particular place at a particular moment. Okay? So the weather here in Bathurst is not the same weather at the same time what's happening in Winnipeg. It's probably a bit different. In fact, I was talking to my son last night, and he's working in northern Manitoba, and he says there's snow. So, you know, the weather is different here. Now, climate is the average weather in an area over a long period of time. Over a long period of time. Okay. So what do we think about when we think about climate? Well, of course, it's the temperature. Is it hot? Is it cold? What is the temperature? Is it minus 40 or is it plus 30? The other thing we look at is humidity, and we can feel that today. They say it's 28 degrees outside today, but it feels like it's 35 because of the humidity. It's the moisture in your air that makes you feel sticky and even hot. Humidity is the moisture in the air. Winds. Is it windy? If we go along the coast, we always have lots of winds. Some places on the earth have more winds than the other. But wind is a part of the climate. And precipitation. That's rain or snow. Okay? Those are parts of climate. Aspects of climate. And what determines climate? Well, that's the thing we're talking about specifically today. It's latitude. Latitude, I'll show you an example, is where we are on the Earth. Are we near the equator? Are we near where Canada is? around 40, 45 degree latitude, or are we up at above 60, up further north? Air circulation. How is the air blowing? Is the air circulation, there are certain air currents. We have a thing called a jet stream in Canada. It's the flow of air that goes from east to west. So here's the Pacific. The air is going this way, but it doesn't go straight across Canada. What happens is that it goes down and comes back up again. It goes down because the cold air from the Arctic is pushing it down in the center of the country. And we have a jet stream that's going from west to east. And of course, another thing that's really important for climate is ocean currents. Ocean currents. And anybody who lives in the Maritimes, if you were in Halifax, for instance, you'll probably find that the weather there is different, have a lot more rain a lot of times along the coast than you do, say, a central part of the country. And lastly, local geography. Geography means, what's the land like? Are you living in the mountains? Are you living in the prairies? Are you living in a desert? Those are local geography, and the climate's going to be different for each one of those things. So here, latitude. Are we living at high or very low altitude? Well, right at the center where there's 0 degrees, that's the equator. 0 degrees latitude. We're living right here in New Brunswick. Okay? We're between 30 and 60, almost halfway, so around 40, 45 degrees latitude. So the higher you go, the colder it gets. The lower you go, the colder it gets. So the closer you get to the equator, you're going to get a different climate than you do in the poles. So latitude, high latitudes, where we are up in here, we have seasons. We have spring, winter, fall, and summer. We change. But if you were living in the equator, you'd have the same type of climate all year round. Okay, that's why people go down to the Caribbean, because in March and April, it's nice and sunny. It's 30 degrees out. It's like that all year long. It's nice, but it's boring. It's the same thing all the time, if you like boring. A lot of people like boring. Boring is good for people like sun. So low latitude, very little throughout the year. So these are the low latitudes. Nothing changes much throughout the year. And the closer to the poles, the greater the variation between summer and winter. And especially up in the Arctic now, when we get to summer, it's getting so warm, the ice is melting. And the polar bears, as we learned, don't have much place to live. Now, why does it change? Why do we have seasons? Well, as we go further and further from the equator, the sun, which is much bigger, as you get to the equator here, the light rays are direct. They're shining direct on it. But as you go to the poles, because the Earth is tilted, it's slanted like this, then the rays are at an angle. Okay? They form an angle. They're not direct. So because it's just like at noontime here, it's a lot higher because the sun's right over our head. But in the morning, the sun just comes up over the horizon. The rays are coming in at an angle, so it's cooler. So it's the same thing on the Earth. The sunlight is not direct at the high and low latitudes. Air circulation. So we know that this is an old saying down here, eh? If you don't like the weather, just wait a few minutes, it's going to change. And when I worked out west, I used to look up in the sky and I'd see the clouds. And I'd say, oh, mackerel sky. We're going to have rain tomorrow. How do you know that? Because by the clouds, when they get that, you see a mackerel fish, how it has a black, dark, and light-colored side to it? When the clouds get like that, we call that mackerel sky. And the sailors used to say, near 24 hours dry. Within 24 hours, it's going to rain. So it tells you about the type of clouds are out there. It talks about the humidity. And what happens, we know that as cold air comes in and it hits warm air is higher, goes up, cold air goes down, they cause a cold front. Many of you probably noticed that it might be really, really warm outside, and all of a sudden you get a cold breeze coming. Well, you know there's a front coming in. And usually, if it's a real strong front, the weather's going to change just before a big rain. So that's air circulation. So warm air rises, goes up, cool. And as it goes up, as the air goes up in the air goes up in the air, double, As the air rises, it might be warm here, but as it goes up, it starts to cool. It starts to cool and gets heavy and then comes back down again. And that's what makes a circulation. Okay, goes up, cools, and then comes back down. So warm air, of course, can hold a lot more moisture. And as it rises and gets cold, what happens to that moisture? Bang, it starts to rain or snow. That's it, it comes out. And the solar energy heats the ground and warms the air above it. So if we have ground, the sun rays, okay, it warms the ground, the air starts to rise, gets cool, and then comes back down again. So that's why it warms up, is because of the sun. And heating of the atmosphere, because we get the circulation, that causes the wind. It starts to go in a cycle. We have different patterns around the world, and they occur at different latitudes. Rains are heavy at the equator. You heard of rainy seasons? They have rainy seasons around the equator, so there'll be months, like in Africa, months of rain, and then you have months of no rain and get a drought. While here in the northern latitudes, it's not as drastic. And because of that big change in the rains, some places are deserts. So we don't get too many deserts above 30 degrees latitude on the planet. So, just looking at this picture, if I get a little higher. Doesn't want to go. Okay. But basically from here to here, that's where most of the deserts occur in the world. Okay. We do have one in here, Death Valley in the United States, and there's one over in here. It's a cold desert, Mongolia. There's also a desert up here, the Arctic. It's a cold desert. Okay, there's nothing growing there. Which way do the winds blow in New Brunswick and in southern New Brunswick? Well, which way do we feel the winds blow? The prevailing winds. They go from west to east. Now, yes, we will get winds coming off the ocean. We get northeasters, the cold wind come off the water, but the main come from west to east. And it's important where you are in the world because that's how sailors know which way to set their sails. In the old days, when they didn't have power, they had to use the wind. Well, the westerlies here, the wind's blowing this way, so they had to travel down to the south first, near the equator, so they could pick up the wind. So someone from England would have to sail down towards Portugal and Spain, and then start going out in the Atlantic so they could catch the wind to come across to the east. And when they want to go back, they had to go north so that they could go and sail back because the wind changes. Those are global patterns. So this is going to be your assignment. I'm going to hand out a copy of this. It'll be on your inbox, or sorry, your pickup box. These are the questions. You can get all of these things from the notes that I've got here. You'll have a copy of it on your inbox. So things like, what's the difference between weather and climate? What are the 4 aspects of climate? So I got 4 of them there, but are they the ones that we have in climate, like temperature, latitude, humidity, and wind? Or are they aspects of it? Just go back to your notes and you'll see the answers. You'll fill out the blanks here. And there's a true or false one there. So I think there's 9, 10 questions to answer. Just to go back, I'll show you something that's interesting. You may or may not know this. I'm talking about things like fronts. If we were in Western Canada, say in BC here, we know the Pacific Ocean is here, and the winds are coming up going west to east. And they had these great big mountains, of course, in BC. What happens there? Well, as the warm wind comes across the ocean and it hits this big mountain, and you know there's snow on the top, the warm air rises, and when it gets to the top, of course, it gets cold, right? And as it goes over, it snows, makes all kinds of snow on the top. And then as it comes down, there's no more moisture left. It's all come out. So these air now is dry. And this is Alberta, on the other side of the mountains. And you'll hear about Alberta have these winds called Chinook winds. And they're very, very dry. And here in New Brunswick, we'll have snowstorms in January and February, and we'll hear in the news, it's really warm in Alberta. Why? They're even further north than we are. It's because of this wind, this ocean current that brought the moisture, and this dry, and warms it up there. So it does affect our climate, even in a country like Canada. In a map of Canada, you'll notice that I've got a few minutes, maybe I can bring one up. I'll show you quickly the difference between New Brunswick and Winnipeg. Okay, so here we are in northern New Brunswick. Oops, right there. This is Bathurst right here. And if we go across, there is Winnipeg right here. It's almost at the same latitude as northern New Brunswick. The temperature in the wintertime in Winnipeg is really cold and dry because up here, the Arctic, they have this cold air coming down, and it makes a big difference in Winnipeg. It could be minus 30 there and maybe only 0 degrees here. Very cold. So ocean currents, local geography, mountains, deserts, they all are different aspects of climate. Okay? Any questions? All right, we're going to end it there, and I'll after I finish the other class, I'll post this assignment on your pickup box.